Hello, hello, welcome to the Takedown, subverting power with radical thought. I know we haven't had a live show in quite some time, and I'm glad to be back. I'm glad, that my small but loyal fan base has kept up with me and has decided to join me today. And so basically, we have a couple things to talk about. There's a lot of kind of random stuff that kind of happened during this period. I want to first apologize. I work in IT, so when disasters happen, we kind of get called in and we kind of don't get to leave. So we had a big fire at our main data center. So a lot of things were very hectic for me. And then, of course, we've had some scheduling issues and things of that nature. But I do want to invite you to take a look at the interview that I did with Ben Norton a couple weeks ago. That was a very, very enlightening interview about Syria. And I think I'm pretty much done talking about that, as far as, kind of solidifying where my views are. So if you want to check out that video to kind of figure out kind of where I fall and kind of why I'm so critical of the dominant narratives on Syria, please check that video out. It's on my playlist. And then it's also on the Benjamin Dixon channel. It's also there as well. But take a look. Now, I want to take this time to let you guys know that what we're going to be talking about today is going to basically be about consistency. And the way I'm trying to consistently, use knowledge that I know about multiple areas to kind of help me navigate who we are. So the first thing I want to say is, let's talk about the world. A lot of times when I'm talking to people about how things work or just talking about, how things are run in general, there's always this, you have to separate the mythos and then like the belief that's propagated by, basically the powers that be, or formal education, or even just by movies and television and media in general about how the world kind of works. So I'm gonna give like a general overview of how I feel it works. And I'm gonna first say and I'm not talking about like the world as in institutions and all that. I'm talking about just general humanity. Humanity can be divided into three groups. You have Group A, people who basically survive off of their material holdings. They have assets and things of that nature that generate income in excess of what they can spend. These people I can call Group A. Then you have, basically everybody else who is like, they sell their labor in order to survive. So Group A lives off of their assets and income generating assets and things of that nature. And then Group B, they sell their labor to basically earn a decent living. And so I could separate Group B into two different subgroups, two subgroups. You got Group B, and then in that group, there's subgroups, two groups. One group is those that sell their labor and receive a decent standard living. And then there are those who sell their labor and receive a very, very poor standard of living. And I'm going to say we have B and, C really. But I really wanted to say like there's a major distinction between A and B and C. B and C sell their labor. A does not. Right? So we just talked about B, who sell their labor and receive a decent standard of living. Then we have Group C, who basically live, kind of hand to mouth. Like basically they're living in utter and destitute poverty. These are like, the absolute bottom in developing nations, even, I would say like poor Americans here in America in many respects live, quite similarly, where, they survive off of a few meager dollars a day. Food is very insecure. Survival is very insecure. There is no such thing or a concept of stability. Being able to plan and move forward and think about the future, that doesn't really matter because it's just a day-to-day struggle just to survive. That's what I would call Group C. And so I want us to think about like every time that somebody talks about poverty or somebody talks about, the state of America or wealth and poverty, even when they have that juxtaposition right there, when they examine that dichotomy, like they never seem to make it clear that these things are related. Like they make it seem like wealth and poverty exist in a vacuum. And, that's just not what happens. In order for someone to amass and accumulate a vast sum of wealth, it's coming from somewhere. And the way our structures and the way our political institutions, the way our economic institutions are set up, it's coming from all of us. That's literally what's happening. And in order for somebody to live destitute poverty while somebody else lives in extravagant wealth, there's a correlation. Many people have to be poor in order for one person to be obscenely rich. And you'll see that where you have basically situations where wherever there is immense wealth, wherever it is, in every country where there's just vast, enormous wealth, there's destitute poverty on the other side. And it's because one can't exist without the other. And I think we have to make that very, very clear that obscene wealth causes obscene poverty under the current economic system. That is something that we cannot refute. It's something that we cannot run away from. And I'm going to talk about the debate that seems to be rising up again, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. I just want to kind of lay kind of like the groundwork for how I interpret events, right? And this is not like the whole of my thought processes. I'm just saying like, this is kind of where I start when I look at the world, right? So no one's going to admit that great wealth equals great poverty. And when you talk to people, they'll talk about like, well, the world is generally getting better. People's lives are improving. Not really. No. Underlying that statement is the belief that through time, over time, people generally get better. And that's not necessarily the case. Some people get better. Some people get worse. It all depends. It's not like some sort of, universal theme that like over time, things always will improve. That's just not true. That's something that is largely propagated to basically make you feel as though that even though things may not be working out well for you right now, that any improvement you get or any change that you get because it happens in a later period of time or happens over a period of time, it necessarily makes you better off. And we all know that that's just not true. It's patently not true. So that's just kind of why I wanted to think about that. I want to explain to you guys that. And the last statement I'll make is, people will try to talk about capitalism in like this positive light. And they always, make the point that it raises living standards and improves the lives of everyone. And what I'll say is, again, that's just not true. Most of the world is capitalist, right? Yet most of the population of the world, like the sheer number, like the majority of the population of the world lives in destitute poverty. So if it really is raising living standards and improving the lives of everybody, why is it that the world exists in the way that it does? It doesn't. It doesn't really jive. It doesn't really fit. So now that we understand that that's the way I see it, well, now you start asking the question, well, why is it that way? And I've already kind of went there a little bit. I've said, this is achieved through a structural means. Like this is a design. It's a very, very meticulous design. Now, that's not to say it's a design by any one person, but it definitely is a design of generations of people working in concert to do things that suit their own interests. And it just so happens that they have both the will and desire, but also the power to do so. And I'm not necessarily going to go like deep into like power, but what I'm going to talk about is we have to understand that in this world, Group A has the ability to exert like far greater influence over things than, people in Group B and people in Group C. I think there was a study by Princeton that talked about, democracy just in the United States, and it basically said that the United States doesn't really have a democracy. It has, an oligarchy or a plutocracy, really, where you have the wealthy people basically deciding the policy. And the only time that people who are, in the bottom 80% really get their way is when someone at the top or a faction of the very wealthy at the top actually agree with them and decide that that's what the policy is going to be. So rewinding all the way back, how do we get here? It goes back to the the way America was really designed and structured. And the reason why I'm focusing on America is because, of course, we're a democracy here in America, but America is, the lone superpower since the end of World War II here. And so kind of the global order and the system that exists around the world today is something that kind of was planned, designed, and implemented by America to benefit America. And basically, it's America kind of pushing its vision onto the world for its own purposes, right? So we're going to focus on America, but I want to say, like, the institutions and political structures that we have in America, are kind of illustrated even in the global sense. Like, there are poor countries, there are countries in the middle, and then there are countries at the top. There are a few countries at the top, more countries in the middle, Group B, and then there's tons of countries in Group C. And then you go into the country, intra-country, you have people who are at the top, more people than who are at the top in Group B, and then tons of people in that bottom group. And that's kind of like how it plays out. And it's just weird to me that whenever we're talking about this kind of stuff, whenever somebody wants to really examine and try to get at why this may be happening or how does it exist, like, everybody wants to look at each individual piece in the vacuum. And I think that's wrong. Like, and I think the key to it, at least when you're talking about domestically in America, the key to it is the dominating perception of how politics works. And I know I've talked about this, a couple of times when I say, like, how politics works this, or, that's really not how that works. But a lot of us see politics, not saying everybody, a lot of us see politics as like a team sport. And rather than, when you watch a football game, you're rooting for your team. Nothing you do, nothing you say, no matter how hard you scream, no matter how hard you jump up and down, no matter how hard you cheer, when you're watching a football game on TV in your house, you have no influence on that game. But you're invested. You're invested in seeing your team win for whatever reason. It could be a shared town. It could be one of the players. It could be you just like their colors. It could be you like the logo. It could be anything. Maybe that's just a family tradition that you root for that team. But for whatever reason, you're invested in that team's success against the other team, whoever it may be. You're just invested in that team's success. And, and I don't see how you can be so invested. You're just a spectator. You're not even in the game. But when you treat politics like that, it's weird. Let's say you have referees or maybe even you see something. You're not even a referee. You see something that was wrong, something your team did that was against the rules or was cheating or something. But because it's your team, you're more concerned about winning the game, and you don't necessarily care how your team plays or what your team does, so long as they win. Right? Here's a problem with that, though. What happens, when you view politics like that is, again, like I said, in a sports team, when you're watching a sports event, nothing you do influences the cycle. You're not on the field. You're not playing. But in politics, you're not just a spectator. You are actually in the game. Like, what you do, what you convince your neighbors to do, what you convince your friends to do, who you reach out to and talk to, what meetings you show up to, you are in the game. And every play, everything that occurs on that field is going to affect your life in one way or another. And the saddest thing is, even the people that understand this, I still think we forget, like, sometimes it's not even about us individually. Sometimes it's about what's best for us collectively. And, I'll make an analogy. In America, we believe in individualism. I'm getting ahead of myself. But in America, we believe in individualism. But, at a certain point, there has to be a balance between what's best for the collective and what's best for the individual. Case in point, when you get sick, you have an infection of some sort, it is in your best interest to take, I don't know, to go to the store and take like, or to get like a prescription for over-the-counter antibiotics or prescription antibiotics, right? There are a prescription, right? You can get some antibiotics and you can just take that. And more than likely, depending on what you have, if it's common or something like that, more than likely, you know, it's going to die to antibiotics, and it'll clean it up faster if it's bacterial. Here's the problem. You know, we had a situation where everybody was just doing that because, yeah, it gets them individually over the disease fastest, right? You know, rather than them actually going through the natural process of recovering from a disease that you can recover from without antibiotics. People did that so much that you start to have a strain of bacteria or strains of bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. So now you've got antibiotic resistant strains that now the whole populace has to deal with because each of us individually was doing what's best for us individually. But in the end, now we've burdened the entire populace with something new. You know, I'm just using the antibiotics as a case in point, right? I mean, I can even go to economic examples. You know, it behooves people to save money. But what would happen if people really did just start saving vast sums of money? If they just stopped frivolously spending all the time? If people really did start saving all the time and stop spending, the economy will grind to a halt. I'm just being honest because that's what our economy is built off of. It would grind to a halt because thrift is not necessarily good if everybody is thrifty collectively. Because in order for somebody to sell, somebody has to buy. But if everybody's saving and not buying, now you have less people to sell to and you start a death spiral. So sometimes, you know, what we do individually and what's best for us individually is not always what's best for us collectively. So going all the way back to what I was talking about when I started this conversation, like how I interpret the world, I separate when I'm viewing politics and when I'm viewing things, I separate what's best for the collective and what's best for me individually. And then sometimes there's like an overlap, right? There's a ton of overlap. There's like things where, hey, this may benefit me better today, or this may benefit me right now. It gives an upfront benefit, but it has a long-term cost. And that cost over the long period can be greater than what I have right now upfront as a benefit. And so these are just kind of thoughts that I'm thinking inside my head. And whenever I try to really focus on an issue, I find that like, because we aren't thinking about this all the same time, sometimes where we're coming from may not be all there, if that makes any sense. Anybody, I'm going to take a look at the chat real quick so you can kind of see what I'm trying to shape here. I know I'm out of practice, so I'm not really focusing it like I really want to. Give me 1 second. I need to basically just open up the chat here so I can see the chat. I didn't have it open today before I started talking. Okay, so now I've got the chat open here, and I was basically just kind of asking you guys if you guys kind of see what I'm trying to shape here. I know you guys have talked to people where, you know, something seems like it makes sense, but it's just like, well, if you interject a new piece of evidence, it might not make sense. It kind of just falls apart. So now let's talk about individuals. There's a dual critique going on. And this is focused on our politicians, which are basically the cogs of our institutions, right? So there's always this turmoil. Okay, you have a politician. Yes, he made a mistake, but that's just our system. You know, and usually this is usually meant to like excuse some behavior or some kind of critique that somebody's bringing against the politician for maybe why they may not like them or why they may like what they've done, or a general critique on their whole history of what they've done, not just one particular issue. And a lot of times we'll get this critique that says, well, you can't really blame them for that because everybody does that, or that's just the way our system is set up. And so here's the question: if that's the way our system is set up, if we can't hold any individual politician accountable for their participation in a system, how do we change the system? We're not going to change the cogs because you can't hold anybody accountable and get the people in that you want to be in. And then if they do get in there, you decide to overlook when they betray the interest that you sent them there to represent. You overlook that because your rationalization is, well, everybody does it, so it must be okay. That's not good. Some things are the system. Sometimes the system is set up and it's wrong and people are just acting in the system, but that's an individual, right? That's an individual acting. And as such, if you sent them there to do X and they do Y, you have to hold them accountable. And if nobody was willing to do what you want, perhaps you should run for something. Perhaps you should get together a group of people and run and stick to what you were trying to get done and know who you're doing it for. And people will support you for that. But my point is, we recently had a situation a couple weeks back where Barack Obama was paid, several $100,000 for doing a Wall Street speech. And what I'll say to you is, at the time, I thought it was just so strange that you see all these apologists out there saying, well, they all do it. They all make money off of being president and things of that nature. But that's looking at it in a vacuum. If Barack Obama was merely being paid this much money to give a speech and he hadn't been president, he was just a guy that's just really wealthy and he gets paid to do speeches, he's a great motivational speaker, guess what? More power to him. But that's not what's happening. You have a situation where, there were things that were done for individuals, for companies, for groups of people while he was in office and had, basically power. He did favors. And then when he's done serving his time in public service, he's basically there to get his hookup. And instead of defending instead of criticizing this hookup, saying, aha, I told you his policies were favoring them and now they're showering him with riches. Basically he's getting his cut. People want to defend this because everybody has done it. That's not right. At the very least, that's not right. And we're looking at it in a vacuum. It's okay for anybody to make money. What is not okay is for somebody to make money off of me, off of all of the people that he screwed over with his policies that favored some over others. And let's be clear. That is what's going on. That is what happened in that administration. Some people got preferential treatment. Other people, you just got the short end of the stick. And now those people that basically received that preferential treatment, received, policies that would enrich their companies and enrich them personally. Now they basically come back and they reward people for, services rendered. They're basically paying for the services that they rendered or they had rendered onto them. That's what this money is. And I don't care if he donates $2 million to the Chicago, to your Chicago, after school program, because guess what? If somebody gave you $2 million, you can donate $200,000. What's the problem? They gave you $2 million, you donate $200,000. You basically, whatever you gained personally is less than what you gave out. So you're still net positive, right? And then on top of that, whatever you gave away in terms of state resources, which is communally owned by all of us, all of those things, they far exceed whatever they gave you. So in the end, the public is still at a net loss. So 2 million here, $1 million there, it doesn't mean anything because we're still at, who knows? They've shown studies where companies, when they lobby and they give money to politicians, and this is just one form, this is the forms that you can track. They get, 800 times return on their investment. That is utterly ridiculous. And what I will do is I will make sure on the YouTube video that I post a link to that study, and I'm going to write it down right now. ROI for political spending. And we just need to look at it and understand that these people are getting, 6, 7, 800 times whatever their investment. So that's not tenable. That's not tenable. And when you're talking about net loss or net gain, when you're looking at the actual, P&L from like a collective response, we've all lost. Barack Obama's up. Whoever paid him is even up more than whatever they paid him. And whatever those individuals actually got out of the deal, they're up even more than whatever trickles down back into, the public coffers. And that's not to say that I'm saying that the government needs to tax back money or anything like that. I'm just saying in terms of public resources, meaning opportunity cost. If I spend $5 here, I can't spend $5 there. I did this, and now I didn't do something else. You can't do everything all at once, right? The government is no different. Because they did these things, they didn't do other things. Because you did let bankers walk free, you didn't send them to jail. Opportunity costs, trade-offs. That's just how it is. Like there's a fork, and instead of going right, they went left. Or instead of going left, they went right. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not a funny guy. I'm really not. But I just thought that was something I would just throw out there because I kind of see people defending it, and the critique is ridiculous. By saying that you can't blame Obama for his duplicitousness or his complicity in allowing Wall Street to get away with basically fraudulent behavior that will be criminally fraudulent under the law if they had just prosecuted them for whatever reason, for political favor, for cash payout, whatever it is. The only people that lost out in that was us, the regular average Joe that may have been damaged by their policies, by their actions, the people who were fraudulently evicted from their homes, the people who had their homes taken fraudulently, the people who had their homes taken because of a predatory process. The people that were sold subprime mortgages, companies that had subprime lending that bankrupted companies and people lost their jobs. Like it's wrong to say that it's okay for him to make money. Or I guess it's right to say it's okay for him to make money, but it's wrong to not look at how that money was made, why it was given to him, and by whom. Right? If you want to look at it in a vacuum, it just seems fine, but we're not looking at it in a vacuum. We have to take all of it collectively together and look at it. And so now I want to move to the next topic. People want you to see politics in a very shallow form. And what I mean by that is, just like what I talked about, they want you to basically examine each thing in a vacuum and not think about the past, think about the present. And a good example of this, they'll come up to you and say, well, who do you support, Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump? And if you look at them in a vacuum, one seems vastly different from another on many, many issues. But when you start looking at the cycle, the actual cycle of, okay, the person that has this types of politics generally puts in place policies that don't necessarily help people, and people kind of just oscillate back and forth. How the two-party system really works. When people think they only have two choices, when they're stuck with something bad, they'll go to anything that's just different, and it could even be worse, and they just pass it back and forth. So like understanding that, you would understand that that's not really a choice at all. You basically bounded the choice between two bad options when you even ask somebody that question. So you really don't have a choice. You've lost choice, or you have a choice, but you're not necessarily free to choose who you want to, because choice is not freedom. And we should understand that by now. So again, they want you to make a choice or to look at things in a vacuum. No type of real thought process in your decision making. And think back. I want you to think about somebody you know. Do you know anybody, or have you ever just made decisions based off of what's right in front of you in the right now, the here and now? Like You always just make the decisions that is best for you right now. Instant gratification. What happens when you make decisions based off that? It never turns out good for you. When you make a decision, you have to make basically go back, and you basically have to say, okay, what do I think this decision will do in the future? What effects will it have in the future? What effects will it have right now? And have I seen anything like this in the past? Have I seen anything like this in the past? Has this happened to someone else? What experience can I learn from things that have already occurred that would inform me to make a better decision right now? When you start asking those types of questions before you make a decision, I consider that like what it takes to be an adult. Like I consider that like an adult thought process. Like that's how you think about things, and you're trying to basically not allow, I don't know, like just spur the moment impulse to basically decide for you, because it's not going to turn out well when you do that. Never will. So when somebody asks you, should you choose Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton? Basically, they're asking you like an impulse decision, like they bounded. You don't even have any freedom to choose a real thing. Because if you look back at history, Hillary Clinton basically represents the conservative forces within the Democratic Party that call themselves the left or call themselves liberals. And Donald Trump represents basically a right-wing version of the same thing. I think Noam Chomsky said it best when he's like, in America, we have two factions of one party. And that may be true in many respects. But again, the choice that they put in front of you is between those two. And they demand that you make a choice within that bounds, and it's just wrong. And so the reason why I'm talking about how we make decisions is because sometimes I feel like we let, propagated mythos kind of cloud how we're making decision processes. And a good example is somebody brought up Bernie Sanders. And I think Bernie Sanders is a very, very particularly effective mythos. So you have a guy who professes to be about a bunch of ideals and is really behind a bunch of good policies, but he consistently allies himself with people that are against those very same policies. So what you can say is, well, he's playing them. He's just trying to get along with them. You can't get along with your political opposition. There is no getting along with these people. They want fundamentally the exact opposite of what you want. So I'm wondering how you can get along with those people. I would barely be able to sit at a table with them, really. When I really think about how they see the world. I have some people that I know, like, we wouldn't be able to be friends if I was in the halls of power and people were actively doing what they're doing. There's a certain, I would say, a righteous anger that I would have at people who inflict large sums of pain on others for their own personal gain. That's just me. I wouldn't be able to be friends with those people, but not everybody has that. And I'm not saying that I require everyone to have that, but I'm just saying in general, I wouldn't be able to be friendly with these people. And you know what, Bernie Sanders, for the most part, he's not necessarily friendly with them, but it does seem like he has internalized the idea that he must get along with them in order to get what he needs to get done. The problem is, in getting along with them, he has to forfeit much of what he's fighting for, because they demand that he not fight for the things and not do the things he should be doing in order to get them in place, because they don't want them. And so if he's going to actually do something to be effective, he's not going to get along with them. Like, that's just what it is. And I don't understand how, something as basic as this is very, very basic. This is so general. This is general logic. And the reason why I have to take it here when we're talking about these issues is because I feel like when we don't break it down and get down to the basic level, when we stack stuff on top of it, it just becomes more complicated and more confusing. So we have to keep the basic stuff clear. You cannot achieve your political goals by aligning with the people that don't want to see those goals come to fruition, and then allowing that alignment to actually subjugate the goals that you're supposed to be fighting for. That's not how that works. I mean, you can argue with me and say, look at all of this that he's done, and look at how he's, he's got all these positive popularity ratings. Look at how popular he is. Well, yeah, he's all over TV. Bernie Sanders is all over TV right now, giving those stump speeches, and people are seeing him for the first time. So yes, his popularity is going to rise because the things that he's saying are very, very popular. Here's the problem, though. He's aligned himself with people that are not even for any of the things that he's saying on TV. And then on top of that, the people, they're not aligned with that, and they're not going to do any of it, but they're allowing him to be their face. Like they're like him. They're associated with him. They're in league with him. They're on the same team as him. And in that way, he's doing a lot of damage. And so, when we look at this kind of stuff, and I've talked about this before, I know I've talked about it before, but I probably won't stop now. I think we have to really start looking at, well, Bernie Sanders, what are you doing? And somebody can say, well, he was threatened. This man has millions of people willing to get out in the streets for him. Like, he has an immense following. At this point, he does have sufficient power to really rival the people inside the establishment if he wants to. He just chooses not to because he has to get along. And he doesn't have to do that. I'm still waiting for the first shot to be fired as far as like him trying to take over the Democratic Party, because so far it seems like he's more trying to accommodate neoliberalism, and it just can't. That's the problem. You can't accommodate it. And this idea that we have to unify and face the right is just wrong, because you can't unify against the right when you have the right in your ranks. You just can't. It just doesn't work very well. And I started this off by talking about consistency. And I kind of had it global, and I brought it down. So now we need to talk about what I mean by consistency. So how many times does a politician really need to go against what you believe in before you decide to stop supporting? Like how long do they get to go? How much rope do they get? With me, I have red lines in the sand, and sad to say, a lot of politicians cross them very, very easily. And I think that when we're talking about red lines, or we're talking about moral things, or morals that you have to stand and keep and basically stand on and not be moved from, I think that if you're trying to take over the Democratic Party and you're trying to do that, one of your red lines should be support for Hillary Clinton and everything that she represents. If you're really trying to be an insurgency, that has to be destroyed. You basically have to make that name a stain, and everybody who was associated with it doesn't want to be around her anymore. Doesn't even want to be associated with that name. That is what you have to do if you want to really start trying to do a revolution. You can't say, well, I supported her, but she believes in everything that I believe in. We have more in common than we have. No, you don't. She's fundamentally a different politician from Bernie Sanders. She's fundamentally a different politician from many progressive circles. Yet, I still have yet to see anybody really make the case that basically that time has come to an end, that the third way is over, that you're no longer going to be supporting those type of politicians. And we even have, new organizations like Justice Democrats who say, yeah, we're going to start fighting the corporate deals. We're going to start primarying them. We're going to get them out of here. Well, okay. Well, if you're going to do that, what happens when one of your candidates is basically a Hillary Clinton supporter, like a hardcore Hillary Clinton supporter? Like, what do you do? Do you drop them? I think you should. I don't think that basically supporting ex-Hillary Clinton supporters, who basically hobnobs with all the high donors in various industries and things of that nature, is the way to go. Now, I'm not saying you go on Open Secrets or something like that, and they've gotten any dollars from any industry, and it's really hard to decipher this, that means that they're untouchable. But when you have people that are, hanging around with Clintonites and like people like John Podesta and lobbying groups, you really need to start looking at this person and saying, well, maybe they're not people that we should be. Maybe they're not people we should be associating ourselves with. Maybe we shouldn't be rallying behind these people. Because the first thing you want to point out is progressive groups have been tricked before. So we need to have some sort of consistent standard, or even just a consistency in our politics that if somebody that we supported did this, we drop them. And that's really how you exert control over politicians. And, ultimately, if you want to have control of your politicians, that's how you exert control over them. But we have to understand that we, the populace, do have the ability to control our politicians. Because I talked to somebody else that considered themselves a very liberal person. But when I started making the case of what has to be done, they said, well, this is impossible. We just need to focus on what's here in front of us. And I'm saying, if you don't build it, it'll never get here. If you don't create it, it will never get here. If you don't make room for it, it will never get here. And you're not making room for anything. You're not pushing anything. You're not creating anything if you're only dealing with what's in front of you. Because what's in front of you is already there. It's not new. It's already there. You have to make what you're looking for. Or at least vow to move away from what's already there into something unknown. Maybe it's not already fully shaped in front of you. Maybe you're going to have to go off into the woods and kind of find your way. But that's what you have to do. And that's really how change can be achieved, only from that mindset. So something is just particularly bothering me. And I have to admit that this is one of my good friends. They told me that basically this is what led me to have this whole conversation today. First off, it turns out that they're a flat earther. And so that's, I guess, I don't know what's up with that. I spent at least an hour and 30 minutes just trying to go over why the earth was probably spherical and all of the confluence evidence that would support such a claim. And I'm not even a scientist, but I kind of went through that and then I just kind of gave up. But the key thing that I took from that is we have a large section of both, even in the progressive circles and even in the populace as a whole, that just lives in illusion. And I'm looking down here at the comments, and I'm gonna get back to what I was talking about. But they pointed out something. They said neolibs let a Dennis Kucinich or a Dean or a Sanders go just so far that they can destroy the movement and co-opt it. And I have to agree with that. But I won't say Dennis Kucinich, co-opted. I will say definitely Dean and Sanders. I don't know what Kucinich is doing now, but we have to understand that, as far as the Democratic side goes, he was the only person willing to vote against the Affordable Care Act to try to make it better from a leftward perspective. And they destroyed him for that. Look at what they did to him. They redistricted him out of Congress. They couldn't actually beat him in an election because he's immensely popular in his time. But they actually, redrew the districts and made sure to cut up his constituency and split him off into other districts so he couldn't win re-election against an incumbent, an establishment incumbent that was also popular. That's what they do to real progressives. Dennis Kucinich he wasn't that bad, and I really hate that we lost him and nobody really said anything about it. A lot of people didn't really focus on it, but Dennis Kucinich was definitely somebody that was worthy of supporting on a multitude of issues. And we have this so-called progressive caucus in Congress, and to be honest with you, they don't really do crap. Like, they vote for the tax cuts, they vote for extending those war expenditure bills. They're not really very progressive at all. But the next thing I want to talk about, and I'm going to have to start getting ready to close it out because I kind of rambled on here and I've lost focus. But two things. There's always a debate. And when I'm talking about what's really progressive and what's really not progressive, I've heard somebody say, like, why are we arguing over what's really progressive? The reason why we argue over what's really progressive is because we're trying to take the definition of progressivism and set a definition for it that's different from the neoliberal definition. So it's important that a political movement, that a political party, that political activist groups, they define themselves. And so the battle is that the label, not like the word Democrat, but the label progressive used to stand for things that were generally, one thing. And then they've kind of flipped to another. And now it's kind of like a struggle for the actual definition. And the reason why that definition is being struggled for, because it has value. And so there's value in struggling over the label. What really is progressive? What's really not progressive? What our definition is going to be for people who may not be in the political arena. It is important that that battle is fought. It is important that the left as a whole be taken away from neoliberals. They need to be pushed out of the left. And you can't do that by cozying up to them. You can't do that by supporting them. You can't do that by doing unity tours with them. And that's something that we all need to internalize and understand. First and foremost, what needs to be done is the left needs to rid itself of neoliberalism. The left needs to rid itself of neoliberalism. The left needs to rid itself of meritocracy. I had an article that I posted in the PA group, written by a professional. I think they're an ER physician. And they talked about how people will have their nails done, or they'll have a nice car, or they'll have some Jordans, but they can't afford health insurance, or they can't afford a prescription medicine that's $40. And the first thing I want to point out was this article was sick. It made me sick to my core. I was angry about it for like half a day. And what angered me more than the actual writing was that, where I found this article, some very liberal individuals were just agreeing with it. Like, oh yeah, I think people just have to make choices. What do you mean by choices? People don't, it's just another form of poor shaming. And it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, how can you shame somebody for wanting to have their nails done? They're marketed to every single day. Everywhere we go, we have this image of beauty put in our heads. Like, we have to look like this. We have to have these things to be happy. And our brains are associative. So when we see that, we identify it with beauty. We have to have it. If we don't have it on ourselves, it affects our self-esteem. It affects a lot of things. It's deeply psychological. Marketing is very powerful. But to say that somebody fell for some marketing and they just so happen to not have the means, so they're making poor choices when you yourself have not had to make such a choice. You yourself know you probably couldn't make a choice. You believe that you could, but if you walk a mile in their shoes, you couldn't make that choice. You would basically have your Jordans. You would eat at McDonald's every now and then, because when life sucks, it's the simple pleasures that really make life worth living. It could be something as simple as going to the movies, eating at McDonald's, having your nails done, owning a pair of Jordans, things like that. Things that really don't mean anything to you now because you have an abundance of resources may mean a lot more when you have a lot less. So I just think that it's really silly to try to judge people for being poor without really walking a mile in their shoes. And so I wanted to point that out first and foremost at the very end of these 2 points that I'm about to make, and I'm going to go ahead and close out. The next point I want to make is, I see that the basic debate is rising up again. You have the Democratic Socialists of America. They're rising up and they're talking about socialism, and you have, Nancy Pelosi. Well, we're capitalists here, and, kind of getting all snooty about it. Let's talk about that. Capitalism versus socialism. That's an academic discussion, because guess what? Most people don't really know what socialism is. And most people really don't know what capitalism is. The waters have been so muddied at this point that those terms don't necessarily mean much to the average person. Like, they mean stuff, but they're not actually accurate. They're not actual real definitive definitions. Like, if I said capitalism, somebody couldn't tell me what it really is, in a real sense, like a real applicable sense, right? They only tell me what the mythos of capitalism is. And the mythos of capitalism seems awesome. And that's very different from the reality of what it really is. So the point I'm trying to make here is, when people start talking about capitalism versus socialism and all this, yeah, it's cool or whatever as a rallying cry to people that don't like capitalism, but to the normal person, it really doesn't mean anything. What's most important is that we focus on policies and solutions to problems that people are living every day. And the reason why we focus on that is because that's where you can actually win people. Because after a while, the ideologues, they're just going to stick in their ideology no matter what. If they're socialists, socialism, if it ends up sucking or if it didn't work out the way they wanted to work out, they're always going to be looking at it from the bounds of, well, socialism is baseline good. We just need to fix some of these problems with it. Same thing with your capitalists. They're always going to look at it from like a positive light. What we need to focus on is, instead of getting into that debate, is focus on policies that would help people. If people are starving, we say, hey, we can use collective resources to basically create affordable food for everyone. If you can't find housing, if you're being gentrified out of your neighborhoods, we need to go to people and saying, hey, look, there are solutions that we can make it so that everybody can live in neighborhoods that are both safe, viable, and have equitable shares of resources, equitable access to healthcare, equitable access to education, things of that nature. And when I say equitable access, I don't mean access that if you can afford it. I mean everybody has access equal to what they need, to the public infrastructure, to the public goods, and they will be good. They will actually solve a lot of problems that many people have to live under or live with. That is where we should be focusing on. There's no reason to be bound by an ideology. And basically, when you're proposing these solutions, if somebody dares say, well, that's not capitalism, or we can't do that, you ask them why not. And if they give up some bullshit reason, be like, no. That's just bullshit. We're going to do this because this is what works. And ultimately, somebody that wants to get their problem solved, if you tell them they can't do that because of capitalism, or you tell them they can't do that because, X, Y, and Z, they're going to say, I don't care what it is. I want my problem solved. And that's how you win the debate. And that's why you should do that. But either way, I've actually run out of time today. Thank you guys for coming on. I want to thank you for spending time with me. And I want to apologize again from the times I've been away. Again, we've had some issues with my job. And of course, I'm a grad student. I'm in finals, so I run out of time too on that. But we'll be actually still, again, first and third Monday of every month. We'll be here. Look forward to seeing you guys next time. Good night.